So we're going to talk about GRAP, the Guard Recruiting Assistant Program, but the purpose of my remarks today is also to talk about leadership, and I think you'll see why as we go through this. If you're not my age, you might not know that Lawyers, Guns, and Money is the name of a song. The story I'm going to tell you involves a whole lot of money, a gaggle of lawyers. Doesn't really involve any guns, but I'll figure out a way to work that into the speech somehow. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. So I said this is about leadership, and it's about my observations of being involved trying to help soldiers, guardsmen, who are caught up in this never-ending scandal called the Guard Recruiting Assistant Program. And I'd like to believe that all of you have heard about this problem, about this situation, but I know unfortunately that's probably not true. This story about guardsmen has been in 60 Minutes. It's been in the Washington Times, New York Times, Army Times, and plenty of other places. But I run into leaders all the time that don't know what's going on. They don't know the impact on guardsmen. You know, Frank Yoakum, our executive director, told me that not too long ago, he had a chance to engage Lieutenant General Hokanson, the vice chair of the National Guard Bureau, vice chief of the National Guard Bureau. And Frank was doing what he and John, President Harris, have been doing for some time now, and that's engaging senior leaders and asking them, when are these investigations going to end? And General Hokanson said to Executive Director Yoakum, GRAP, I thought that ended back in 2012. So apparently he didn't know that it's estimated that thousands of guardsmen now have federal criminal histories as a result of participating in this program. And you may not be aware of that either. Most of the soldiers who are affected, who actually have criminal histories, don't even know that. He probably didn't know that guardsmen have now been flagged for 3, 4, 5 years with no end in sight. Over 160 guardsmen or former guardsmen have faced criminal trials in state or federal civilian courts. And thousands of guardsmen are still dealing with the results of this program. And we know of at least one suicide that is connected to the GRAP investigations. And that doesn't even get into the ongoing problems of promotion review boards, security clearance revocations, separation boards, debarment proceedings, all as a result of participating in this NGB program. So in case you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to explain the program a little bit. And this may hurt to hear some of these details, but you need to know, and more importantly, leaders around the country need to know. GRAP, or Guard Recruiting Assistant Program, ran from 2000 to 2012. I'm sorry, 2005 to 2012. And the concept was to boost in strength at the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And like President Harris said, you could sign up to participate in this program, and you'd get $1,000 if you successfully recruited somebody into joining the Guard, and then another $1,000 when they shipped to basic training. Initially, you had to be an M-Day service member to participate, but later they changed that. ADOS soldiers, AGR soldiers could participate. In fact, the rules were changed over 60 times during the life of the program, and that's part of the problem. The soldiers, the Guard members that participated, got paid as subcontractors to the NGB prime contractor called DocuPack WEPA, and they got a 1099 for tax purposes. Whenever I talk about GRAP, I make it a point to say, yes, some fraud did happen with this program. That's true. There was some unscrupulous participants And I, for one, hope they got everything that they deserved. The problem is a massive dragnet has exploded for a variety of reasons. Politicians grabbed headlines, pumped up the volume, and demanded accountability. Big Army got an opportunity to bash the Guard and get leverage in budget battles. And the Army CID got to bring out the big guns. So they worked in guns. They got to form a task force, and they called it Task Force Raptor. It even sounds kind of sexy, right? This task force of agents was designed to go around the country and investigate participants in the GRAP program. And it was comprised of Army Reserve CID agents who got to come on ADOS orders to do these investigations. So you probably see a little bit of a perception problem. I don't know about you, but I never went on ADOS orders if it was a situation where I was going to lose money. And so the perception problem is, if you're an Army Reserve agent on ADOS orders, the longer the investigations go on, the longer you keep getting paid. And that just smells bad. If you've been in the Guard for more than a few years, I'm guessing you know someone who's been affected by this program. And they may not even be talking about it because it's hurtful, it's embarrassing. In many, many cases, if soldiers made mistakes, it certainly wasn't intentional. It was the result of vague, poorly written rules. Some people, especially at NGB, will tell you that this was a massively successful program, and it did recruit boatloads of soldiers. I'll agree with that. But you can't say it's massively successful unless you have a different definition. Over 100,000 Guardsmen were investigated as a result. I don't call that successful. This program spurred, reportedly, the largest investigation in the history of Army CID. You can hardly call that successful. If your success criteria includes allowing or causing soldiers to be convicted and be sent to prison, then yeah, I guess this would be an awesome program. And if by successful you mean now, even 5 years after the program was terminated, some soldiers, enlisted and officer, remain flagged, and they're trying to deal with that in a way that would allow them to keep their Army career going. When they testified to Congress, some Army generals said this program had possibly up to $100 million in fraud. Well, just that statement alone should cause you to question whether or not this was a successful program. Now, I don't agree with that estimate of the fraud. I think it's wildly off the mark. But I will tell you that just being in a situation where that estimate can be stated is a massive problem for the Guard and a massive problem for all of us as leaders in the Guard. At various times, Big Army and NGB has announced these investigations are over. So don't worry about it. We don't have to keep worrying about this. It's over. Well, the problem is no one ever got around, I guess, to telling CID that, because the investigations continue and they continue. Now, what may be happening, what I believe to be happening, is the reserve CID agents on ADOS orders, their ADOS orders are finally being ended at the end of the fiscal year. But that doesn't mean that this is all over, and it's certainly not going to be over ever for some people who have been caught up in this. The case files will just be handed over to active component CID agents, and the program will The investigations will continue as needed, but equally important, the prosecutions continue. There's a young soldier facing trial next month in Iowa in federal court, a young man facing trial in Riverside, California, also in September, young woman facing trial in San Diego in October, Northern California in October, Puerto Rico in November. And as I mentioned, I know of at least 4 or 5 soldiers that have been flagged for more than 5 years at this point. To me, this program is yet another example that unfortunately it always seems it's the junior enlisted that somehow get ground up by the system. And I feel like part of the problem is we as leaders don't protect them. And I don't think we have in this program. So you may be thinking, well, there's got to be something to this. I mean, the government can't accuse folks of misconduct without at least some evidence, right? And to that I say, not so fast. The problem in this program has a lot to do with how the rules were written, the so-called rules, program guidelines. You know, when I was a second lieutenant, First Sergeant Flom taught me that if you're writing a policy or you're writing something that is a standard of conduct, you got to write it in a way that the most junior person in your unit will understand what you're saying. He taught me to write with terminology like "you shall not" or "you are prohibited from." Very, very clear, direct communication. I probably learned more about writing clearly from First Sergeant Flom than I ever did in college or graduate school. The problem is in GRAP, the program rules were written in a vague manner. They said, you shouldn't. Well, to many people, if you say you shouldn't, especially if you're, say, a special forces guy, that's guidance. That's not a directive. It's not a prohibition. The program rules also oftentimes spoke using terminology like "you may." And so as a result, there's a massive disconnect between perhaps what was the commander's intent of the program and the execution. One of my favorite terms in this program was sphere of influence. Now, imagine if you were charged with a crime for recruiting people outside your sphere of influence. I don't know exactly what that even means, and it was never even defined in the program. The rules were vague. The rules were massively problematic from the beginning, and then they kept changing. By the CID's own count, the rules changed over 60 times during the life of the program. And I said this is about leadership. I believe that as leaders, it's our duty to protect our subordinates, sometimes even from themselves. If you're a leader of soldiers and airmen, I respectfully suggest it's your duty to anticipate what's going to happen and how your subordinates are going to act. If it sounds like I'm indicting everyone, I am. Because I believe if you were a leader during that time frame, you probably share some of the blame. I know that I do. Back in 2005, when this program rolled out, I was a full-time staff officer in my state's headquarters. I had access to the senior leaders. And I remember thinking when this program was announced and it was rolled out, I remember thinking, this doesn't sound right. It kind of feels like Amway or a pyramid scheme or something that just didn't sit right. I had a fundamental problem with the idea of financial incentives for doing what I was always taught is a fundamental task of any guardsman, that being telling your buddies about the Guard and encouraging them to join. But I didn't go to my bosses and say, hey boss, this doesn't sound like a good idea. I didn't say this could backfire. I was probably busy. And so when I didn't say anything, when I didn't speak up, I failed as a leader. Instead, we all got behind this program. TAGS handed out medals to top recruiting assistants for their awesome job that they did. Some of those folks later have faced criminal charges. Commanders pushed this program, and we were all bombarded with announcements and promotions in places like GX Magazine. This program awarded a contract to the company DocuPack WEPA for $450 million. And there's some questions about the legitimacy of the contracts. I invite you to look for yourself, go look at the Army Audit Agency reports, go look at the Senate Subcommittee on Financial Oversight hearings from February 3rd, 2014, and make your own conclusions about whether or not this contract should have ever happened. DocuPack WEPA, the government's prime contractor, got paid $325 on top of the contract price for every new recruit. So think about that. The more recruits, the more money they got paid. I recently got a letter from DocuPack WEPA lawyers, and they said, we've sent legal demand letters out to people who have talked about DocuPack WEPA. And the letter identified one of their attorneys as a guy named Alex Hughes. And the letter went on to say, we know you're speaking at the EANGUS Conference in Reno, Nevada. We know your speech is entitled Lawyers, Guns, and Money, GRAP, a Legacy of Scandal. So in a way, that's really kind of flattering, because here you have a company that's earned millions of dollars, and they care enough about what I think and what I have to say to monitor where I travel to and who I'm talking to. I don't honestly think my wife pays that close of attention to what I'm saying. But the implications of the letter are clear. Right? They were sending a message that we're a rich, powerful country or company, and you better watch what you say about us. And so I want Alex Hughes, the lawyer, and his corporate masters to know that no matter how hard you try, I won't be intimidated, your threats won't work, and your bully tactics aren't going to produce any effects. I will always speak up and stand up for soldiers, for service members in general, and veterans. I'll do it from the podium, I'll do it in the courtroom, and Alex Hughes, if you ever get to hear this speech, I'll do it to your face if you come out of the shadows where you lurk. Oh, and by the way, Alex Hughes, the DocuPack WEPA lawyer, he also represents Lieutenant General Clyde Vaughn. Yeah, so think about that. The Army leader who presided over the GRAP debacle is represented by one of the attorneys representing the contractor that ran this massively flawed program. So I think there's some questions that need to be asked. I want leaders like you and leaders around the country to ask these questions and raise some issues, because I think the soldiers caught up in this mess deserve it. So for example, if this was an NGB program, why aren't NGB personnel the ones flying around to all the trials of the soldiers and testifying about what the rules were? Why is it the DocuPack representatives flying around the country testifying against soldiers? And if the government says that maybe there was $100 million of fraud in this program, and again, I don't necessarily believe that, but anything close to that, if there was fraud, why hasn't somebody at NGB been held accountable? And get this, There's actually been pre-dawn tactical raids on Guardsmen's homes in Puerto Rico to apprehend them for allegations of GREP fraud. Tactical raids on homes of soldiers for something that everyone would acknowledge that even if it was true is a white-collar type offense. That just makes my head want to explode. And there's more. I could go on and on. There was Guardsmen in New Mexico who were actually surveilled by CID agents because he had allegations of misconduct in GRAP that related to years prior, but they were actually doing surveillance on him. That seems a little like government overreach to me. And if all this supposed misconduct happened in off-duty time, then doesn't this massive task force of federal agents, federal military agents, at least violate the spirit of the Posse Comitatus Act, if not the actual law? The problem is I'm not aware of any leaders or elected representatives, congressmen, asking these tough questions. I get wanting the bad news story to go away, and I get protecting the institution, I really do. But it's just not fair when young junior enlisted soldiers are being ground up in a program that we all endorsed and we encouraged. It's just not fair, and so these questions have to be asked. Maybe I've missed it, but I'm not aware of any adjutant general or state senior enlisted leader who has raised any of these issues publicly. I know some of them have privately, but I'm not aware of anyone raising these issues publicly. And until they do, I don't think we're going to get any kind of measure of justice from this program. So here's the deal. Here's what I think is one of the most important things to keep in mind. It seems to me that now more than ever, America needs the National Guard. And I know you know exactly what I mean. Our country is more polarized than ever before. We'll face more social unrest, like what we saw in Charlottesville, where the Virginia Guard was mobilized in response to the violence. We're going to face more natural disasters, like what we see down in Texas right now. And we'll continue to face the prospect of never-ending war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other flashpoints around the world like North Korea. America desperately needs the Guard, but it only works if we have a connection to the people we serve and the hometowns we come from. And so think about it. If you were a soldier or an airman unfairly accused of misconduct related to a program that your leaders asked you to participate in, and then they didn't do anything to come to your defense, would you go to the young people in your hometown and encourage them to join the Guard? I don't think so. And that scares me. But I have some good news. I recently became a life member of EANGUS. And I want to tell you why, because this is the important part. I'm a lifetime member of my state association, a lifetime member of NAUGUS and the Special Forces Association, and all kinds of veterans group and lawyer groups. And I didn't join as a life member this late in my life because I needed bragging rights or I needed another bullet on the resume. I joined because over the last couple of years of working with your president, John Harris, your executive director, Frank Yoakum, I have been consistently impressed and inspired by their leadership. They have both been unrelenting in advocating that these investigations come to an end. They have been probably the most effective advocates trying to make a difference in the lives of soldiers. And your executive council also showed tremendous leadership in recently passing a resolution calling for the investigations to be terminated and for the soldiers' good names to be restored. Absolutely. And so I very simply felt like I wanted to pay dues and be a card-carrying life member of this association. You all should be very, very proud of your association. I think they're providing tremendous leadership that's desperately needed, because no other organization has stood up on this issue and advocated for soldiers caught up in this mess. Let me say that again. No other organization has stood up for the soldiers. Every other organization that should be advocating for the soldiers and demanding justice and demanding accountability, they're missing in action. They've ceded the battlefield. Only EANGUS, and only under the leadership of your president, John Harris. As I've said before, you should be exceptionally proud. So at this point, you're probably either thinking, okay, well, Doug, tell me what I can do, or you're thinking, is this guy done yet, and when's he gonna be done? So I'm gonna tell you 3 things that you can do to make this situation better for the soldiers impacted by this flawed program. The first is, I respectfully suggest that the state associations follow the lead of the EANGUS Council and pass a resolution calling for justice in these cases, calling for an end to the investigations, and then send that resolution to every elected official that you can think of, and then follow up with them. So that's the first thing. Secondly, if you're a leader or gonna be a leader, when you have a soldier or an airman accused of misconduct, demand to see the evidence. You swore an oath, and I know you take it very seriously, to the Constitution, and you swore an oath to things like the presumption of innocence and the right to confront the accusers against you. I'm encouraging you to make your own assessment. Don't just conclude because CID or OSI agents tell you that they've determined somebody is guilty or there was misconduct. Don't let them take your role as a commander or a commander's senior enlisted leader. Don't let them usurp your authority. Check out the facts for yourself. And you'll be shocked, I think, for what passes as justice these days. As an example, there's these promotion review boards going on. A lot of GRAP victims have to go through this process. The problem is they don't even get to see the evidence against them. And worse than that, I think, is the idea that the board members, in many cases senior officers, sitting in judgment of these other soldiers, are asked to render a decision when they don't get to see the evidence either. They're forced into a situation where they're supposed to make a decision based simply on a conclusory CID report that simply says, we did this, this, and this, we interviewed some people, and we've determined the soldier is guilty of misconduct. That's not justice. If you're sitting in judgment, you have a duty, I submit to you, to make your own independent decision. And I find it shameful that officers are participating in that sort of board. So finally, the third thing, educate yourself. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything I've said today. After all, I'm a lawyer, right? But But educate yourself and form your own opinions. There's a tremendous volume of different material, news articles out there on the internet. Dig in, get informed, make your own conclusions about whether or not this was a righteous program or whether or not we as Guard leaders set up our subordinates to fail. Because keep in mind, no matter how GRAP ends, there'll be another program in the future. Some good idea rolled out from NGB where some contractor's making money, and it could be your subordinates that get jammed up next time. When we talk about educating yourself, you have an opportunity right here at this conference. Tomorrow at 14:15, there'll be a panel discussion about GRAP. And if you come to that, you'll actually have the opportunity to hear from soldiers that were impacted by this program. You'll hear from soldiers that were interrogated by CID. You'll also get to hear from Liz Ullman. Liz is an amazing woman. She's the leading advocate for GRAP victims in the country. And I strongly encourage you to come hear from Liz. She doesn't have a dog in this fight. She doesn't have a husband who's a service member or a child who's a service member. She is involved in the issue simply because she saw what happened to a young man down the street who she knew was the kind of kid in the neighborhood who all the moms wanted their kid to be like. And he grew up and he joined the Colorado Guard and became a Special Forces soldier. And then later, when his leadership asked him, he got involved in GRAP. And then after that, he faced criminal charges. And Liz dug in, she did the research, and now she speaks out. And so if you come tomorrow at 14:15 in the Silver Baron rooms 5 and 6, you'll get to hear from her and hopefully some soldiers. It's a great opportunity to learn more. So I'm very, very proud to be here. I'm proud of this organization and your leaders. And I want to thank you for everything that you're doing for your subordinates now and in the future. Thank you.
I appreciate you.